That's a big boy there. That's a big boy there. That's where he lives. Hey everybody, Clint here from Oak and Iron Outdoors. I'm going to publicly in a swamp today, and I'm going to talk to you about buck rubs. And I've been chasing these deer for 38 years, and I'm going to share with you my knowledge on what I've learned from buck rubs. And there are some things that I think you need to avoid. There's some traps that you can fall into, but there's also some things that you need to be aware of when you see this deer sign and what it means. Rubs, for me, are an amplifier. And what I mean by that is that they are not the tell-all of whether or not, essentially, I should be hunting a particular spot, or even a rub line for that matter. What it is that topography, bedding, and essentially how thermals and wind travels through an area is going to determine where I hunt first. And then if the sign, the deer sign being scrapes, and in this case here today that we're going to talk about buck rubs are there, that's basically the frosting on the cake, letting me know that this is the area that I want to be in. I think a lot of people get caught up into just seeing rubs somewhere, any type of rubs, and they immediately think that they have to set up right there. And a lot of these rubs, you have to understand when a buck is traveling and making these rubs, most of these are going to be done at night. Probably 95% of these are going to be done at night. Here in Wisconsin, we can only hunt during the daytime. So with that being said, you have to be careful setting up on these rubs. Now, years ago, back in the 80s and 90s, there was kind of a big kick to hunt or bow hunt these rub lines. Yes, you can kill bucks off of rub lines, but with that being said, I used to hunt rub lines when I was younger. When you're learning and you're starting out, you don't know everything, so you trial and error. And I'm going to tell you right now, out of all the rub lines I've ever set up on, I have never killed a mature buck on a rub line. And 38 years of bow hunting, never killed one on a rub line. Doesn't mean that they go through there. Doesn't mean that they walk through there. Trail cameras have told me, yes, they do follow those rub lines. Once again, mostly at night, and they don't come through as much as you think they do. The other thing is, let's just take a look at common sense here. Look at a deer rub. Do you see a deer rub or a buck rub just rubbed right down to the middle of the tree? If a buck was coming to that particular tree and rubbing it every single day, okay, as some people might think, that tree should literally be just pounded. It should look like a beaver got a hold of it, but it's not. And if you really look closely at a buck rub or buck rubs, you'll notice that, there's just a little bit of that outside bark taken off of a particular tree. So a lot of these rubs, when they're made once, and then they might come back a little bit and rub some of that forehead gland essentially on that tree to leave their scent, and scratch that tree up just a little bit more. But buck rubs are not something that you can sit over consistently and expect to kill a big buck. But once again, I'm going to go back to what I mentioned earlier. They are an amplifier. When I find a particular spot that I want to set up in, okay, the thing that might be the deciding factor is the buck rubs in that particular area, but I'm not focusing on them. The other thing that the rubs can tell me what to do as far as where I want to set up. If I'm seeing particular rubs on a particular side of a cedar swamp or dogwood or a little pine plantation, then I know that's obviously where they're traveling without seeing trails. Now, I'm in the snow here, and we just had fresh snowfall. I'm scouting today, and I'm not seeing much for deer trails back here, and these deer are back here, but this is a fresh snow, so I can't rely essentially on the ground, and I can't even rely on scrapes that happened back in the fall because they're very hard to see. Now, I can look at some of the overhanging branches on some particular trails. The ends might be bitten off a little bit, but the only thing that I can read right now as far as deer sign goes are buck rubs. So let's go over a little bit more detail. on rubs, what they mean, what to look for, and what to be careful about. Now I'm walking into a cedar island here, and this is one of these deals where when I walk into a particular spot, like a cedar island, I'm expecting to see rubs. It's kind of one of them things where it's not like if I see them or don't see them, but I should see something here. And if I don't, I will technically put a little cedar island like this on a back burner. And I have just found a rub right here connecting one of the cedar spots. And here's a small rub right here. So fellow deer hunters, one of the things that if you're new into hunting and you're a new bow hunter and you're trying to decide whether or not a rub, is a fresh rub made from this past fall, just bring your hunting knife along and then just take it, and you're just gonna wanna take some of the bark off top and see how close it looks to the previous rub. Now, obviously it's not gonna look super fresh, super green compared to what it was, but it shouldn't look too far off from last fall's rub. So if you're new to this game and you're trying to determine how old a rub is, just scrape just a little bit of bark off the top and you can see how close it matches. As you can tell, it's a little open over there. So a new bow hunter might come here, see this particular rub, and they're going to think to themselves, I'm gonna hunt down there somewhere or maybe behind me here. And, this area in here is where he's going to frequent. And they're gonna try to set up a stand in here in this open area. And it's actually open ash and open elm and open popples down there. Now the experienced bow hunter is gonna take a look at this, and he's gonna look at this cedar island over here. And this is why it's so important to do your scouting here in February and March. So here is a rub here. And what it's telling me is that this buck literally hit that spot on that edge, on that corner. But his intention wasn't to go down that logging road. His intention was to come here, hit this particular rub, and then hit the next cedar island. And these cedar islands back here aren't very big, but they use these to traverse one area to the next because they offer much more security cover than some of that open woods back there. It's not really open hardwoods. It's actually open ash and open elm popple. Now, one thing I want you guys to notice is that there is literally a deep gouge. And what it is, it's his brow tine that came in here and basically scraped this up. And then he didn't put a whole heck of a lot of time into this particular rub. When you look at this, you can see kind of an open area there. The other thing you have to be careful with too is the direction that these rubs go. Just because you see a rub showing that direction, which there really is no area for even a buck to technically walk through, a little more open there. A lot of times what these bucks like to do, they like to come in here. They'll come in, they'll put a rub in there from the side, coming at a 90-degree angle, and then they'll back out and then they'll head back into that direction. So you have to be careful when you're spotting these rubs. I think some people also get mismatched when they look at some of these rubs thinking that's the direction that they're going from or even coming from. And that's not always true. You have to look at the topography a little bit, and you have to back out and look at the bigger picture at times too, because you have to make sense of these rubs. Bucks in general do not walk around the woods and just make rubs for the heck of it. A lot of people think they do, but they have a rhyme and a reason why and where they do. Yes, testosterone sometimes takes over, and they'll just grab a random tree and pound the crap out of it. But in most cases, from my experience, bucks do have a rhyme and a reason why they make rubs where they do. That's the rub there. We had the rub behind us. Now we're going to walk into the cedars here and see if we find another rub. And I see a really good rub right up here. That is a really good rub. Now, there are the temporary rubs, like I just talked about. And then we have a rub right here where this rub, as you can tell, it's not real high, so it's probably not a real big buck. And I'll put my hand out here so you can kind of get an idea of how big this rub is. But this rub has been rubbed for quite a while last year. It is definitely a rub from last year, so it is what I would call a new rub. But when you look at it, it's definitely been hammered away. Even if I rotate the phone, you can see on the back side and then all the way around. So this is a rub that a buck or multiple bucks have come to and, put their forehead gland on here and scratched her up pretty good. Does that mean that we set up on this particular rub? No, probably not. There are, I think, other areas around here that would be better for setting up. But once again, we're just reading the rubs today, trying to determine if there's anything that they tell us. And once again, they're just an amplifier of whether or not a spot is worthy of putting up a stand or maybe not so much. Make sure that you slow down. And, that's one of the reasons why I do like to scout by myself, because I go at my pace. Now, granted, it's always great to have another set of eyes with you. But when you get to a spot, or what I do is when I get to a spot that looks like it should be an area that a big buck would somewhere or somehow come through, I literally stop. And I am just observing 360 all the way around me. And I want to make sure I catch any little sign that a mature buck might leave. And you'd be surprised when you slow down and you literally stop and you look all the way around you, what you can see. And the other thing is, make sure you think. And what I mean by that is, don't just look at sign and observe it. Don't just look at a map, your Onyx, and you put down that little button that said there's a big rub right here. Look at it and think on why a big buck is utilizing this area. Think about the thermals. Think about the winds. Think about where other hunters come in and out. Try to put literally a picture or a movie in your mind and look at the area and try to picture that buck coming through here. How would he come through here, knowing what you know, and pick a particular wind direction and a thermal and put it all together and literally see it in your mind happening. And you'd be surprised by just slowing down, stopping, and thinking about the situation and what you can see in the deer woods. You can talk to some of these big, bow hunters that have all these big TV shows. They're going to show you how to kill bucks out of food plots. And they're going to talk about, owning that big property, managing that big property. But when you have to hunt like I do, public land, woods, knock on door permission woods, you have to think. You have to be able to outsmart these deer because they're a different breed. They're a different buck that's out here. This is what I'm looking for here, folks. As you can tell, we're a pretty good sized rub here. Now, it is hard to tell if this was made last fall or the previous fall because I'm not showing anything underneath the bark. Very well could have been made this past fall here. But in order for a buck to be able to make a rub like this, he has to be able to get that rack completely around this tree. So even if I put my hands here, we're public land, a public land rack that's that wide, and we're probably talking 17, 18 inches width on the inside. That's a good buck here on public land here in Wisconsin anyways. It could even be bigger than that, who knows. But anyway, this is what I'm looking for as far as the rubs go. Now, I am in a thick area of the cedars. We have a lot of security cover around us, and this buck is essentially coming from that direction, obviously, and he's heading this particular direction here. So, folks, one thing I want to show you real quick is a tree soar. Now, people will actually mistake this for a buck rub, and, there's new bow hunters out there. We all have to learn some way, somewhere, somehow. But if you see this where it has a distinct lip, there's a distinct lip here of the tree bark, then coming into the actual tree itself, that is a tree soar. Because I have seen guys I've been with that they thought that was a rub. Because from a distance, they can look like rubs. But these are tree soars, folks. Now, one thing you do have to be aware of when it comes to rubs, and this is something I always find interesting whenever I hit a mature whitetail. And he takes off, and essentially he heads to his bedding area or a safe zone. And it'll be funny on how you'll actually spot his rubs going right down to that safe zone. And these big bucks, it's almost like they walk or they run, or however, when they're hit, they'll literally walk right next to those rubs. Sometimes even, I've had it where a little blood comes off the side of them. It'll actually touch a tree that they essentially rubbed on in the past when they're heading down to their safe zone, or essentially to get the hell out of Dodge because they had an arrow hit or stuck in them. And in a lot of ways, when you find those rubs, they're coming out of those really thick spots, and I mean thick. Now, some people might look behind me and they think that the cedar island, it might be a little thicker, just because essentially you couldn't shoot a bow probably past 15 yards in here. That's not thick. Thick is to the point where as a man, you can hardly walk through it. And that's one of the great things about scouting this time of year. I can get into these really thick bedding areas and I can look inside them and see, do we have rubs in these buck bedding areas? And then what kind of rubs do we have? And that's essentially how, you're going about and you're finding these bedding areas. Now, one of the things that I do want to mention is some people might believe this, some people might not. But the more I've been chasing these whitetails, they do not bed in the same bed, I believe, 2 times in a row. Earlier season, I would say yes, that is more likely. But when we're talking mid-October and right up through the rut time frame, these bucks, from my experience, it's like they bed in a bed once every 7, 8, 9 days, it seems like. So just because you think you find a buck bed or a buck bedding area doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be there. However, there's other certain aspects, usually weather, wind, thermals, what's going on, time of year in the deer woods, where the does are estrus-wise, that can help you narrow that down a little bit more in regards to finding where a buck is essentially bedding. But that's for a different video someday, folks. And I don't want to get down a rabbit hole here because we're supposed to be talking about rubs, but rubs play a part in that. Rubs play a very big part in that, and they're going to showcase where those essentially buck bedding areas are. Well, folks, here's another really good buck rub in the swamp. And, we're probably talking, I'm guessing about 5 to 6 inches in diameter, but it's shredded up pretty good. And as you can tell, if you look back right down in here, you can see the scratches. You can see those brow tine scratches coming in here and gouging this up. So this is a sign of a pretty good buck. It is a little lower to the ground. Doesn't necessarily mean, though, that it's a small buck. However, I've seen big bucks lower their head and pound the crap out of a tree as well. And you have to understand, we got quite a bit of snow here. So this snow is fairly deep. So this rub is actually a little higher than it looks. Now, here's something really interesting. So when you take a look at this particular rub, I want you to focus not just on the tree right here, okay? So we got the tree with the rub. This rub here, it's not a monstrosity of a tree, but I want you to look over here once. And this is a joining tree. And there are marks from his rack that is touching and knocking bark off that tree right there. So you want to look at every clue available to you when you're trying to determine how big these particular rubs are. And not only that, we're going to take a look at the depth of the gouge here. And actually, that's pretty deep. He got in here pretty good. So this wasn't your typical early season just trying to get, velvet off kind of a rub. This rub, he had some intentions to hurt somebody. And he ripped this tree up pretty good. When you look at this rub, he's either headed that particular direction or he came from behind me and he's headed into that particular direction. And in reality, it doesn't really matter too much in some ways on where he's going. I want to know where he's come from. Hey, what you carried around there? You gonna take that snowball home? Really? You gonna take that big snowball home? So, folks, this is kind of interesting. I see people that'll walk in the woods and they'll see stuff like this going on. And they will think that this is a small deer rub or a small buck rub. And in reality, it's just rabbits that are eating the bark. And that becomes very prevalent here in mid to late February when food sources become low and rabbits are looking for something to eat. So they'll actually stand up on their back hind legs and eat as much of the bark as they can. I'm going to step out of the public land here today, and then I'm going to regroup, and tomorrow we're going to head to some of my knock-on-door permission properties, and I have a couple of properties that have really big bucks this past fall on them, and I'm going to showcase, hopefully, the rubs. Should be able to find a few. And then I'll talk to you about what I'm seeing and then how we're going to utilize those as far as the setups go here for the next year. Day 2, folks, and I am in a dead ash swamp. This is a knock-on-door permission property of mine. It's right around 18 acres. I did have a big buck early season last year, August, September. Tall Paul, if you remember Tall Paul from 2 years ago, he's still alive. Now, he was back in here up until about mid-October, and then he just disappeared on me completely, and I thought maybe somebody got him or got hit by a car. And then come December, I caught him again on another camera of mine. So he did come back, and then he was back in here for a couple of weeks per se, and then I didn't catch him after that again. So he is still alive. Now, he likes to reside in this particular swamp. This is 2 years in a row that he prefers the swamp when it comes to early season up until about mid-October, and then he gets out of here. So he's essentially a buck that I almost have to kill during that time frame. I'm going to see if I can't find his particular rubs to see where he is messing around back here. Literally the only time I actually come into this swamp is in February or March to see what's going on, and then the next time is September. All right, folks, so I got some fresh rubs right here, and I only walked maybe about 60 yards. And this is from this previous fall. So we're just going to keep walking. Once again, you know, these rubs, they can lead to the bedding area, and they might be just a rub on his way out. Now, it's kind of hard to tell from where I am down here, but that's the field edge out there. So essentially what this is telling me right now is he's coming from his bedding area, and then he's putting these rubs in, or maybe multiple bucks could be putting rubs in here right before they head out to that field edge. So if you made it this far in the video, kudos to you and thank you. And in all reality, this is probably the best part of the video, in that this is the reason I utilize rubs. And when I get close to a bedding area, the rubs that are close to the bedding area, and I'm going to try to track or follow these rubs right back into his buck bed. The rubs that I see out in open hardwoods on a field edge, they mean little to me for the most part. But this is what I'm looking for when I'm looking at rubs. I want to be able to take a particular rub line, and I want to take it right back into his bed. And it's not a slam dunk either. Tall Paul tends to like this nasty swamp, if you want to call it that, dead ash swamp, through the summer is what I'm guessing. And then right around that early October, he likes to sneak out of here, and I don't know where he goes, but he goes somewhere else for a little while, and then he comes back here. Now, I do have a little rub right here. Came into there, up and huge. But once again, all of these rubs are leading out to that field edge over there. So as long as I keep seeing rubs pointing that direction, I'm going to keep following in that direction and hopefully find what I'm looking for. All right, I've been walking just a little bit now. I got just a really small rub, and it's extremely low to the ground. We're probably only about maybe 8 inches off the ground here. So I'm going to deduct that is not the buck that essentially that I've been looking for. We're not far from another field edge, which is right over there. But we're going to just keep moving ahead here. There's also a possibility that where I found a lot of those rubs over there, and it's thick enough that that could be his bedding area right back there. I'm going to keep moving ahead here, and then we'll swing back around and see if we can't pick up more rubs up ahead. And then if not, we're going to swing back around, and that could be his area where I originally started. Now, the one thing I do want to say, though, is where he was coming out and I was getting him on trail camera was up ahead. And the previous year was the same thing. He would showcase way up in there. Now, we also have to kind of use common sense here. And as I said earlier, it was his summer home primarily, and then into the early fall season. So he's probably not going to have a lot of opportunity to put a lot of rubs down. You have to keep that in mind. At least I have to keep that in mind. So there's a chance that I might not see a lot of his sign up in here if this is what he was calling his summer home. But you got to be careful with that. Sometimes the sign or the lack thereof doesn't mean that he's technically not there. All right, folks, so I have rubs here again. This is another set I just found But we have a little problem, and that problem is I'm technically on the back side of the property, and now they're heading back out to that field again. So what that is essentially telling me is that somewhere in there is where he's going to be calling home, if he is calling home back here. When you find these buck rubs, it's about reverse engineering, and we're going to start taking them back again. And I'm going to see if I can find some more stuff in here. So folks, I'm going to do a little assessment of the swamp here. And there's two basically main components that I've seen. With the rubs, what they've shown me is that on the end that I started on, that technically third is thicker than the other end, even though both ends would be considered thick, but it's all in relation to each other. This end is thicker. The other thing that we got going on back here is that we essentially have thermals, I believe, that play a big part, also why deer and big bucks prefer this end of the swamp. So let's walk up here, and I'm going to show you what that's all about as well. So while I'm actually on the edge of the swamp now, I'm walking out. I'm going to hold this camera as level as I can. But if you notice, everything goes up a hill, up a hill, up a hill. And this particular end of the swamp is down in a bottom, obviously. But if you saw the other end of the swamp, it actually levels with the agriculture that is around it. So at night, when these thermals drop, and then you have the draw of the water that's in here as well, anything that is out in that particular direction, literally almost all the way around, is going to pull the scent down and into here. So this goes back to why the rubs are showing me what they are. Once again, the rubs are not the tell-all. They essentially are part of the entire strategy, the entire equation. And most of the rubs I saw were on this end, heading back out to that field. So once again, you're using these buck rubs as an amplifier, and sometimes in a way, giving you verification of what's going on in the deer woods. So folks, I'm at a different property right now. Now, this particular property actually is not very far from the property I just came from, which was where Tall Paul was. And because of that, I had Tall Paul here in December on trail camera. Late at night, of course. So the purpose of today is to see if Tall Paul left some rubs and if there's any other buck sign back here. Did have a trail camera back here. And Tall Paul was the only essentially mature whitetail that I would have taken on this particular property. And this property is not very big either, probably about 14-15 acres, pretty small, but he did come through here a couple of times. So once again, we're going to come through and we're going to take a look and see if Tall Paul left some buck sign, and we'll see what other buck sign. You know, the trail cameras don't always tell all. There are ways that bucks do get past those trail cameras, so you have to be a little careful with that too. It's kind of interesting, you know, yesterday I talked about a tree soar, and that's how they're different from rubs, but behind me, I actually have a rub that is on a tree with a tree soar. So let's take a look at that real quick. So right here is the rub. And as you can tell, it has a distinct lip right here. So that's the lip on the other side. This is the lip here, and it just happens to kind of poke out. And in doing so, it is a rub on a tree with a tree soar. Folks, this is why it's so important to slow down. I actually ended up seeing a buck rub right over there. That's what caught my attention. I'm gonna zoom in on that for you guys. And then I'm about 8 feet away, and I saw this guy here. What's interesting is the snow has it all covered up, but you can see where the sides of the tree have been apart. And of course, once I reveal what's inside, we have a really nice rub here. And you know, if you look at it, I'm gonna put my hand here in the back side. I'll wrap my hand on the back side so you can kind of get an idea. And that's a pretty good rub right here. So this could be Tall Paul coming through here. It's hard to tell, but it's a pretty good rub. And Tall Paul was the only big buck that I had on this particular property. The other thing I want you to kind of focus on too, and that's probably part of the problem, is too many people focus on the rub itself, but I want you to look over a little bit. And we got some areas rubbed off of this tree here. But if you notice, like I mentioned earlier about the rabbits, there is nothing eaten off up here. And I am going to put my finger here and go all the way across, and I still can't reach that particular side. So whoever rubbed this guy here was definitely wide enough to catch this side of the tree. So when he came through and he was rubbing the crap out of that, he also caught that too. Now what I find remarkable is this is some pretty thick stuff. I'm surprised that he went through here. And as you look all the way around, I mean, I got brush all the way around me. So we're gonna keep actually looking straight ahead and see what we see. So we got some good rubs right here. And now this is one of these deals where they hit it at a 90-degree angle again. It's way too thick to go that way. And I'm gonna show you right up here, there's actually a trail. I am actually looking to put my first ever food plot up top here. I've never done a food plot before, so if you want, hit that like and subscribe button. You can see how that turns out this year. And this ain't a very big property at all, but he is headed right up that particular direction and coming from that stuff down there. And as you can tell, there is a little opening over my shoulder, and that's where he's coming through. But that's where he's headed right there. Probably looking to put a stand in one of those pines to be able to reach down into this area here. So with this particular property here, what the rubs are telling me is that it is just a rut spot only, you know. And once again, I'm gonna put that food plot here in the springtime. Let's just see if we can't keep a few more does around, and maybe that can make a little bit of a difference as far as keeping a few bucks around, even late season. Because late season, the property that I'm on right now, the food sources pretty much get picked clean around here. And there's really nothing much left for them. Matter of fact, the deer actually vacate this area come late December, and I haven't even crossed a deer track in here yet. And you know, as thick as this is, in some spots, I should say, not right here, should see a few more deer tracks. And you know, this is a fairly fresh snow, but there should be a few more deer tracks back in here. So once again, that little spot, food plot, and then it's just a strip of property that we're hoping a big buck comes through during that rut time frame. You know, your rubs, once again, are amplifiers. Be careful of, you know, sticking to a particular rub or setting up on a rub line. You know, and the prime thing that I'm looking for, but you don't always find it, would be big rubs, tall rubs, and they'd be coming and leading you back with reverse engineering, leading you back to the bedding area. That's essentially letting you know it is one of his primary bedding areas. There's a good chance, you know, if he's still alive, next year you can step as close as you possibly can. Wind, thermals, weather, time of year, and all that stuff needs to match up. But if it does, the scouting that you do now hopefully puts him in the back of your truck.